I'm Zach Randall-Freeman, and you're listening to the Listen Up Girl podcast, your LGBTQ plus news for Wednesday, May 27th, 2026. We have 6 good stories today. First one is Kenya just handed down one of the most important trans rights rulings on the African continent in years. A far-right Australian politician who just won an election broke down in tears during his speech to Parliament, and the reason why is something else, and we have so much more. But let's start with Kenya's High Court hands down landmark trans rights ruling. We're starting today with a historic win, and I said this right, historic win out of Africa. Kenya's High Court has ruled that the government cannot categorically refuse to allow transgender people to change their gender markers on their official documents, including birth certificates, national identity cards, and passports. The justice there delivered the ruling on May 20th, and it is a big deal. The case is brought in 2020 by a prominent Kenyan transgender rights activist, her name is Audrey, and 2 other people, all of whom had applied to have their documents corrected, and they were flatly turned away by government agencies. The Attorney General's position throughout the case, that gender is based on, quote, fact, not feeling. The court did not agree. The justice found that neither the Births and Deaths Registration Act nor the Registration of Persons Act actually prohibits applications to change their gender markers. The refusal to even consider those applications, he said, is violated constitutional protections on equality, dignity, privacy, and the freedom of expression. The court ordered the agencies to receive, consider, and determine those applications within 60 days on a case-by-case basis and in fair and non-discriminatory manner. Now, let's be clear about what this ruling does and doesn't do. It doesn't create a blanket gender marker changes for all Kenyans, and it does not touch Kenya's colonial area law that still criminalize same-sex relationships, laws that carry penalties of up to 14 years in prison. Same-sex intimacy remains illegal in Kenya. That battle is still ahead. But what this ruling does is it establishes that trans Kenyans cannot simply be turned away at the door when they try to live as themselves in their own country. For a continent where LGBTQ plus rights are under severe and often violated pressure, this is a meaningful step. And it builds on the growing body of African jurisprudence, and it builds on what's growing in Africa from Botswana and Zimbabwe that is quietly expanding protections for queer and trans people. The activist Audrey has been fighting for recognition for years and called it a victory for dignity, and it is. So congratulations, Audrey, and to the other transgender people that are trying to just be themselves. Next, a far-right Australian MP breaks down in tears, coming out as gay in Parliament. Now, this story has some layers. Jason Virgo is newly elected member of South Australian House of Assembly. He ran for the rural seat of Kilpop under the banner of Pauline Hanson's One Nation, Australia's far-right anti-immigration populist group. He won in March of 2026, and on May 21st, he delivered his first speech to Parliament, and he came out as gay. He broke down in tears. He said he's been openly gay throughout his entire adult life, but during the campaign, rumors about his sexuality were being spread, and he wanted people to hear it directly from him, not through whispers or as a political attack. He talked about his boyfriend. He said his partner of 11 years was born in Indonesia, is Muslim, and is now a proud Australian. He called him the love of his life. The chamber went quiet, and he had to pause to gather himself. The irony and complexity here are impossible to ignore. Jason Virgo is a member of a party that actively campaigned against LGBTQ plus rights, against immigration, and whose colleague, South Australian One Nation leader Corey Bernardi, delivered his own maiden speech the day before, making statements about transgender people and gender-affirming care that were so offensive, other MPs walked out of the chamber. Virgo himself is not without contradiction. He has talked about immigration levels being too high while calling his immigrant Muslim partner the love of his life. He belongs to a party that has consistently been hostile to very communities he is part of. What do we make of him? I honestly don't know. He is not a hero of this story in any simple way, but his tears in that chamber are real. His love for his partner is real, and the fact that a One Nation MP is a conservative rural district stood up and said, I'm gay, this is my love, and I'm telling you myself, that is real too. Politics makes strange characters, and this one is strange too. So let's see what happens. Next, Durham Pride, saved by trade unions after a reformed UK council cuts funding. Across the Atlantic to England, and a story about what happens when a local government decides LGBTQ plus pride events aren't worth funding anymore. Durham County Council in one of north of England is now run by Reform UK, the far-right populist party that has been making waves in British politics. When they took control after the elections in May of 2025, one of the first moves was pulling funding from Durham Pride. Deputy Leader Councillor Darren Grimes, and yes, that is the same Darren Grimes of the Brexit controversy fame, called the event political street theater and said Durham Pride wouldn't see a single penny from the council. He also said, I want to be very clear about this because it's important to hear. Pride stopped being a celebration of gay rights a long time ago. It's morphed into a traveling billboard for gender ideology and political activism. The council had previously invested up to £10,000 in the event, and that money was gone. So what happened next? The trade union movement stepped up. The Durham Miners Association, the TUC, and the Coalition of Unions launched a fundraising campaign. British Performing Arts Union Equity alone donated over £7,000. By the time the fundraising is complete, Durham Pride had raised more than £15,000, exceeding what the council had been contributing. And Durham Pride 2026 is happening. It will take place at the end of May, featuring performers including Steps star Claire Richards, former Pop Idol finalist Garth Gates, and a lineup that reflects the joy and defiance that Pride events have always embodied. The Pride flag that was removed from the Durham County Hall when Reform UK took over is going to fly elsewhere during the celebrations. This is a beautiful irony in the story. The party that wanted to erase Pride from the city ended up accidentally demonstrating exactly why community solidarity is more powerful than any council vote. The miners backed us, the actors backed us, and we are going to dance. I love that. I mean, the community came together. It gives me chills. I want more of this. I want to hear more stories about the community coming together, because they completely backhanded the group that was trying to erase them. Amazing. Love that. Next, Spain tops Europe's LGBTQ plus rights ranking, displacing Malta after a decade. This is a good news story from the ILGA Europe, the Brussels-based LGBTQ plus human rights organization that publishes its annual rainbow map each year, ranking 49 European countries on their laws and policies affecting LGBTQ plus people. For the past decade, Malta held the #1 spot. In 2026, Malta has been displaced by Spain. ILGA Europe cited Spain's rise as a result of a combination of achievements, fully functioning depathologization of trans identities in healthcare, new legal protections, a new national LGBTQ plus and trans strategy, a new independent equal treatment authority, and what the organization called a determined fight back against far-right attempts to dismantle trans protections. Spain jumps to the #1, reflects real political courage at a moment when many European governments are retreating or simply staying silent. The report has a critical finding worth naming. Most of the progress made in Europe on LGBTQ rights right now is not coming from governments proactively passing legislation. It is coming from activists and court rulings forcing the issue. Think about that for a second. In 2026, in most of the liberal parts of the world, LGBTQ plus rights are advancing primarily because courts and activists are dragging governments along, not because leaders are doing the right thing on their own. That is a state we are in. Hungary, by the way, recently had its anti-LGBTQ plus propaganda law struck down by European Court of Justice in a landmark ruling in April. The UK dropped significantly in the rankings, and Slovakia and Belarus were flagged for rollbacks tied to wider democratic decline. The good news, rights are moving. The sobering news, that people doing the moving for us are mostly us. Next, San Francisco YMCA updates locker room rules and trans controversy. This story is getting a lot of attention. There's a lot coming from a very bad faith media coverage. So let's report what actually happens. The Stone Towns Family YMCA in San Francisco has updated its locker room guidelines. The new policy states that nudity should be discreet, limited, and brief, and that is permitted only while actively showering. Members are expected to remain clothed or covered when using shared spaces outside the showering. The policy also adds guidance on the usage of hair dryers and supervision requirements for younger children. The context changes follow a period of dispute involving a trans woman member of the facility, identified in reports only as Sammy, who other members had raised concerns about over the past 2 years, including petitions and complaints to management. The YMCA has not publicly commented on detail on the specific catalyst for the updated guidelines. The YMCA's current policy still states that members and guests may use the locker room of their gender identity. That language is unchanged. Now, the right-wing media is having an absolute field day with this story, and a lot of coverage is dishonest, dehumanizing, and deliberately inflammatory. The framing from outlets like Fox News, Town Hall, and the Daily Mail have been explicitly transphobic. Not a surprise there. The story is being used as a cudgel to argue against trans people's rights to exist in public spaces. The actual story is more complicated. There appear to be legitimate questions about conduct in shared space, questions that apply to anyone, trans or not, and the YMCA is trying to navigate that. What it doesn't justify is a kind of blanket dehumanization that's been flooding the zone around this story. Trans women have the right to exist, they have the right to use the locker rooms, and nuance still exists, even when the internet tries to burn it down. Some of these news outlets like Fox News and Daily Mail, it's so pitiful. They're pitiful. That's all I'm going to say. And today, our last story is Seattle's queer beach goes to trial today. We close on a story that starts locally but carries real symbolic weight. Today, May 27th, a trial begins in Seattle over the future of Denny Blaine Park, a historically LGBTQ plus clothing optional beach on Lake Washington that has been a queer gathering space for decades. The lawsuit was filed by Denny Blaine Park Community, Inc., a group that has been fighting for the right of nude and queer beachgoers to continue using the park the way they have for years. The case centers on a dispute with the city over rules and enforcement that advocates say had been selectively applied in ways that threaten the character and safety of this space. Denny Blaine has been a sanctuary specifically and explicitly for queer people who have used it as a place of belonging, visibility, and community. In a political climate where queer public space is increasingly under attack from legislation, from police, and from organized harassment campaigns, the fight for the beach matters. Queer spaces don't just appear, they are built, sustained, and fought for by the people who need them. That's true of a community center in Minnesota, a drag bar in Nashville, and a beach on Lake Washington. The trial begins today, and I will bring you updates as they move through the trial. So this is your Listen Up Girl podcast for Wednesday, May 27th. Thank you for listening and giving me your time today. If this show means something to you, please share it, send it to a friend, post it, leave a review. When you listen, it makes a difference. Take care of yourself, and I'll be back tomorrow with more news. Thanks for listening.